Thanks, Jez. Hello. I feel like I should be doing a talk on London shopfronts now, which was one of the first ever talks I gave. So, I'd like you all to imagine for a moment an organisation where there is a project manager. And that project manager, he's called Andrew, and he's working on a fairly traditional project. He's got a waterfall, he understands all that, and he does really well. And in the organisation, there's also an Agile team. And for whatever reason, the Agile team lead, the delivery manager or Agile project manager or whatever name you might call it, leaves. So there's a bit of a gap. And the powers that be, the managers, decide, well, Andrew's great at doing this stuff, and, you know, Agile is the same as other project management, it's just a different methodology. So what we do is we take Andrew out from here, and we put him in that team over here. So they do that. And Andrew thinks, great, new opportunity, I've heard about this new Agile thing, it's fantastic. And he reads up a little bit and he thinks, okay, I've got it, just a different way of doing things. And it doesn't go particularly well. And there isn't anyone else in the organisation that he can talk to. The only person he could have spoken to was the person that's now left. So he struggles, and he gets quite miserable and unhappy, and the team get quite miserable and unhappy, and they stop delivering things very well because they're vibing off of his unhappiness. And eventually he leaves. Now, Andrew isn't particularly a real person, but it's based on quite a number of people I've seen. And I'd like to ask you all a question, if this works. It's not working. Okay. So hands up if you've ever left an organisation because you feel unsupported. So quite a few hands gone up there. You're not alone. A study carried out by an organisation called Benchmark said 19% of people say they leave their jobs because they're feeling unappreciated. So I was reading a book a little while ago, this book called Social by Matthew Lieberman. It's a fantastic book, and one of the things it said in it that really resonated with me is absence of support is taken as a sign of mass rejection by the person that's not feeling supported. It also goes on to say that public speaking, the reason people don't like it is one way to be rejected by an entire room all at the same time. So please be nice. We need to be supported at work. It gives us the confidence, safe environment where we can make mistakes. And there's some facts here with this sad panda. There was a study carried out by Warwick University in the UK that said that unhappy people, so they got a bunch of people, they made them happy or unhappy by showing them funny videos or making them talk about a sad moment in their life. Those people that were unhappy were 12% less productive than a control group, and happy people were 10% more productive. So there's a link between happiness and our ability to do work. So this is a good stat if you ever need to get anything from your company, maybe that pool table that you were after. So sink or swim is not a management tactic we should be aspiring to. Has anyone actually been in that, an organisation where they've just been thrown in to get on with it? I know I have. And you can some people manage it and some people don't. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to avoid this, how to avoid people being unhappy and leaving, and some other great reasons why you need communities of practice in your Agile organisations, or actually any organisations. So my name's Emily Webber. I have a habit, aside from collecting pictures of shop fronts in London. So I looked back when I became independent consultant. I think I looked back over some of the things that I'd done during my career and during my life, and I realised that I have this habit of connecting people. I have a habit of setting up communities. I think I can't really help it. I have this idea that we are better together. And this slide, collecting logos, that might be my habit. So on the left, here, on the right is a number of things that I've done outside work that are community-based, things that I just can't help doing. So I run a couple of meetups. One of them's on a bench in a park. This Hackney one that's down here, this was a community website that I set up for people in the area of London that I lived in at the time. And that was just about getting people together and thinking that actually as a group of people we were more powerful and we could get things done. On the other side is some of the organisations that I've worked with where I've built communities of practice or are in the process of helping them build communities of practice. Jez mentioned GDS before, which was where I worked for a while, getting people together, and a lot of the learnings from there I've taken to other places too. So, communities of practice, as described by Etienne Wenger, trainer, and his wife Beverly, trainer. They are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. It's been popularised by, I'll do a quick show of hands, who's seen the Spotify engineering videos? Quite a few people. That's really kind of pushed out this idea of communities of practice and communities of interest. So communities of practice, I tend to make them about people that are doing the same role. They are non-hierarchical. This is really important. They're quite like a team, but they don't have an end date. And they're voluntary. And voluntary is really important. They're also longer term and more about organisational structure and a bit more kind of strategic than a team. All right, can anyone tell me what this picture is? Heard some more. Do you have silos here in Denmark? Okay. So you know that you have silos in your organisation when you say things like this. And I've done this myself. So you often say, procurement are rubbish, commercial are rubbish, that team over there, they're rubbish. And that means that you stop talking about people as individuals and you start talking about them as homogenous groups. And that's much easier to disassociate them as people, and it's easier to blame them. Quick show of hands. Who has silos in their organisation? Those of you that don't, do you just work on your own? So communication can be very difficult. It causes duplication of work, it causes frustration. It's actually one of the things that makes it really difficult to do Agile when you're in a large organisation, because you end up going, yeah, it's all great, and we're doing all this stuff, and then suddenly security swoop in and say you can't release that. You're going to have to go through, I've been working in government, you're going to have to go through these many number of forms before you can do anything. So this is the old world when we lived in our functional silos, or I like to think of them as maybe typing pools. And I used to live in this world. I was a project manager. Don't tell anyone, that's a secret. I was a project manager. I sat with other project managers. We had developers. The developers sat with developers. The designers sat with designers. And it was great for learning from each other, and it was great for communication between each other. And it was great that we could really get good at our craft because we spent a lot of time together. Not very good for team working, not very good for the teams that are working on an individual outcome. So we mix that up, and we have multidisciplinary teams. We kind of make those little silos. And so that's great for team working, but you've kind of lost that getting together and talking that you had before. And then we put some programs around that. So we've got our team silos and our program silos. And then what you've got is, the developer that works over there doesn't ever talk to the developer that works over here because they're so far away from each other. So they're not really getting together on any occasion. So we need to put some structure around that. Structure, not a terrible word, to help get people together. And this is where communities of practice come in. So it cuts across teams, it cuts across programs, sometimes it cuts across organizations. And the really important bit here, so up the side, towards the program and the team, that's the what you do, that's the day-to-day, what you're doing, and gives you the direction of why you're doing it. But this bit across the community is the how you do it. So I like to think of this as keeping you honest. So if you've ever been in a situation where you're the only person on your team that does a particular role, and you've got maybe program manager, program director, or someone, product owner, trying to make you do things in a way that you don't think is quite the right way to do things, this is the group of people that you can then turn to and say, is this crazy? Am I all right in thinking that I'm pushing back on this? You've got this group here. So this is kind of real matrix management as well. What it also allows you to do is scale. We all love scale, right? Everyone talks about scale. The place that you really want to get to with a community of practice is that group of people own the quality and standards of what it means of doing that role. Now, I've been in places where you'll have a centre of excellence. There will be a bunch of people that dictate how people do a role, and they might write some guidance, and they'll say, this is how you do the role. You have to follow these rules. But what the community of practice is about is that those people that actually do the role and understand it, owning what that means and getting better all the time. The other thing is the authority board or the sign-off boards. Actually, if you have the teams talking, the people in the community talking on a regular basis and sharing what good looks like, then you can push that quality into the teams rather than having to do it afterwards. So, quick show of hands, who is in a community of practice? Great, quite a few, good. Who is setting one up? A few more, very popular at the moment, which is great for me as a consultant. Before I talk any more about communities of practice, I'm just going to talk about sense of community. And this is important for any community. And it's worth bearing in mind when you are setting up a community of practice, and probably worth thinking about with your teams as well. So there are 4 aspects of sense of community. Excuse me. Those things are membership. So understanding the criteria for being a member, understanding whether you're in or out. That can be quite easy on a team because you know whether you're on the team or not always. And having that safe environment, that safety, and that safe to ask stupid questions, close the door, and talk about stuff that might be sensitive. The next thing is influence, that the members have influence over the community, and the community has influence over its members. The best picture for fulfillment of needs, I find, is an ice cream. So members need to feel rewarded for being part of it. I mentioned communities of practice are voluntary. People have to feel that they're getting something out of it or they won't take part in it. And finally, emotional connection, which I always depict as being in the pub. So time to bond, shared history and shared participation, or something that people can identify. So those 4 aspects are for any type of community, not just a community of practice, but it's worth bearing in mind. So, why are they essential? So I've mentioned that people need to feel supported in their roles. I often, when I talk about communities of practice, talk about support networks first, because our organisations are full of people. People are everything, and if they don't feel supported, then they won't hang around or they'll be demotivated. So that's really important. We also learn better when we learn together, and learning is one of the most visible bits of value that any community of practice will have. Just to explain, whilst I was at GDS, our community of practice was a group of delivery managers that met on a weekly basis for an hour. I think they've mixed it up now, and they meet every other week at the moment. And often we'd get together and do something around learning. So we were passing information between each other and learning together. Now, actually, quick question. Is anyone here on a training budget? Do you have training? A couple of, 1, 2, 3. Do people have training budgets? Or do you have, yeah, let us know and we'll sign it off maybe. So lots of organisations think about training of individuals or professional development as an individualistic activity. It's something that people do, but groups don't necessarily do. And so what happens is individuals get trained in different things, the things they're interested in, and then you have this disparity in the community, or not community, in that role of people within the organisation. And the other thing that I've seen is that sometimes training budgets come from different places. So some people have access to this stuff and other people don't. So you have, people growing at different rates. So if you do have a community of practice, obviously it all magically goes green and everybody learns from each other. And you can start thinking about that group of people and the skills development of that group of people as a whole. And it doesn't have to be just sending people on training courses or sending them to conferences. It could be that actually one person in the community knows something about something and other people don't, so they can bring that knowledge in and share it with other people and find different ways of doing that. The other thing, so social learning theory, which Albert Bandura talked about in 1977, is all about how we learn from mimicking other people. So we learn as children from copying what our parents do. And I saw this in action a little while back. I went to visit my brother and his wife and their 2 kids. And one of the kids, she was going around cleaning everything. She had this little spray can and she was just cleaning everything. And I was thinking, why is she doing that? That's quite weird. And then I realized that her mother is obsessed with cleaning stuff. So she's just mimicking that. I asked if I could take her home. She could do my house. My sister-in-law wasn't too keen on that. Didn't really happen. So we learn from each other. And we need time to practice. So I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he's a developer, and he had this moment of epiphany, and I thought, that's great, I'm going to steal that. And what he said was, the thing about footballers. So footballers, they train loads, they spend loads of time practicing, and then they have an important game. They don't, you wouldn't hire a footballer and just make them do an important game every day. He said, it's not fair, because developers, it's match day every day. You don't really get that time to stand back and practice. It's another one for you all to take away for your managers. So treat me like a footballer. So you need a safe space to practice in. Do people here do things like coding katas? Practice like that? Couple? 1? So the types of things that you can do within your community for practicing. Presentations and talks from internal and external speakers. One of the things that I recommend a lot to communities is when they have their sessions together, and if they can't go to conferences, that actually wonderful conferences like GOTO record all the talks so they can watch them together. They don't have to be there. They don't have to pay to bring someone in. Time to practice skills in a safe environment. I often say to people that run lots of workshops that they can practice those workshops with their peers in that safe environment before taking them out to clients or to their real team. Things like games and workshops and exercise to embed learning. And also visits. When you have a community, you can go and visit another organisation that does similar things to you. It's easier when you're a government department and you haven't got commercially sensitive things on the wall. It's harder when you don't want to go and see your competitors. I had one organisation where they're like, that's great, but we can't bring other people in because they can't see anything. We can bring them in and just talk to them downstairs. So learning from other people and other organisations is something that you can do as a group. Now, not all knowledge can be written down. So many times, and I've seen this, same with an organisation that I'm working with at the moment, the communities of practice for them sit within knowledge management, and it's been a knowledge management term for a very long time. And what they tend to do is they confuse communities of practice with tools. So they build or they buy some kind of networking platform, and they get people to sign up, and they think that the community talking on there shows that they're talking to each other, and they forget about the human side of communities of practice. So I wouldn't be an Agile coach worth my salt if I didn't have either Japanese words or Taiichi Ohno on the screen. So here's a picture of Taiichi Ohno. Saying knowledge is something you buy with the money, and wisdom is something you acquire by doing it. And I turn this into the knowledge iceberg. So the knowledge iceberg at the top has explicit knowledge. This is the stuff that you can write down, the stuff that you put on that wiki that no one can ever find, that stuff. So the stuff that you can write down, the processes that are maybe repeatable. And then under the water, you have this implicit knowledge or tacit knowledge. And the tacit knowledge is the stuff that lives in our culture and lives in our people. And you can't really write it down. So it might be the things, sometimes it's things like that person over there in the organization knows how to get things signed off really quickly. But they can't really write that down because that's just, knowing how to pick up the phone and talk to someone. So there's lots of bits that live within our culture, and we need some kind of structure to help that live in the brain of the organisation rather than the individuals. So it's a lot of exercise, this talk. Another question: who left their last job within 5 years? Okay, keep your hand up if that was 4 years, 3, 2. Quite a few. 1, couple. Those of you that are longer than that, it's very impressive. So on average, people move jobs every 4.4 years, so says Forbes. And those people that are a bit younger, so born between the early 80s and the 2000s, it's more often. And I would suggest that in digital, with our very buoyant job markets, that we move quite often, more often than that. And when they leave, they take bits of your organisational brain with them. I often have conversations, this has happened in a few places I've been, so setting up communities of practice, and that's all good. And the organisations have a mix of permanent employees and contractors, and they say, well, we're not going to invite the contractors to the communities of practice because they're not being paid to learn, they're here, they're being paid to do a job. And I say, okay, well then at what point do you ever get that knowledge, transfer that knowledge from those contractors into the organisation? You end up with this perpetual contractor cycle because you're never actually getting that extra benefit and bringing them in. I actually saw an email just on this subject the other day where someone said the contractor can't take part, they'll be called upon when we need knowledge from them, or something like that. So the question I would say, so when was the last time you had a good handover? So you join an organisation, or you join a new role, and the person there before said, great, I've set aside 5 days. We're going to sit down, we're going to do a really good handover, we're going to have 5 days to do this. And then you go and try and find them, and they've been called into some meetings. They've got some stuff they've got to do because they're going to be leaving in 5 days. They've just got some loose ends to tie up. And then, okay, so a couple of days of meetings. You're like, great, we've got 3 days. And then on the third day, they're like, well, it's just something's gone wrong over here. I'm just going to fix that. You go, great, right, we've got 2 days. And then on the Thursday, they're like, well, I need to go for lunch with my team in the pub because I'm leaving. And they don't come back from that. So you're like, okay. Not really had any handover here. And then on the Friday, well, they've kind of checked out. They don't really care at this point. They're going to go and join another company. So they sit down with you for 20 minutes. And in 20 minutes, you need all the knowledge that's in their head downloaded into your brain. There's really successful handovers. They always work. So we don't want that. We don't want the let's just get everyone's knowledge out of their head in 20 minutes. It's not going to work. Okay. So collaboration. We all know collaboration's good, right? And collaboration leads to better practices. I don't like to use the term best practices. Sounds really final. It sounds like one of those things that you can write down. I like to say better practices because we should always be looking for better ways to do things. So there's a guy called Sandy Pentland. He wrote a book called Social Physics. He's done a lot of studies around the amount, how successful companies are based on the amount of time that people in those companies talk to each other. He's done experiments where he's put like little electric devices on people that will see how many times that they talk to each other. And those companies that talk more are more successful. And he also talks about collaboration not being about working together, but actually about people building on top of each other's experiences. So collaboration isn't just that person plus that person. It's exponentially more than that because they're building on top of each other's knowledge and experience. And that's why teams of people have this collective intelligence that's greater than the sum of its parts. So we've moved from silos to sharing knowledge. And sharing knowledge is something that happens particularly early on in a community. When people start to get together, they start to share knowledge with each other. And the more they do that, they start to talk about common problems that they've had and start to look for solutions to those problems, which leads them to using the collective knowledge of the community to create better practices. Now, I have illustrated this for you with one of the best Venn diagrams you'll find on the internet. So here we have our silos. And here we have some knowledge sharing, which is great, leads to less reducing duplication. And then we have this magic. So this is a graphic I stole, borrowed from Tenso Graphics. It is available as a t-shirt from Threadless. I know how you all love Threadless t-shirts. So this is where the magic happens, and this is where the collaboration and the better practices and the center of excellence. And the types of things, this is lovely, this picture, isn't it? Who wants a duck-billed platypus now at home? Me, really. So the types of things that I've seen communities of practice doing that start to create real value for the organization, and this is the stuff where you start to be able to measure it and show what great things it does and tick off the is it creating value box. So design communities create design patterns, so things that other designers or other parts of the organization can use. I've seen product owners creating training for the organization. I've seen lots of communities creating training, actually, and there's a real tangible financial benefit there if you're not sending people out to expensive training courses. Developer communities creating code tests and interviews for new developers, or as Camille was talking about earlier, developers actually owning and creating those career ladders. And a large bank in the UK had their Agile community ended up creating an Agile transformation strategy for the organisation. So instead of spending all that money on highly paid consultants, they actually did it internally, did it for themselves. Okay, so I'm going to give you some tips on getting started, and then I'm going to give you a couple of pointers. So something I've done recently, going into a new organisation, ask if communities of practice are already forming. So what tends to happen is these things start forming by themselves. People who are looking for support from other people would tend to reach out to people like them, and they would start to pop up. So if they're forming, you can build on them. If you see them forming and you want to be part of them, you can go and ask to be part of them. If they aren't already forming, there might be reasons why they're not. There might be cultural reasons that's stopping them. An organisation I was working with recently, they have the dreaded utilisation rates. Anyone here have utilisation rates? Sorry about that. How much of your time do you spend making it up? I'll just put a little bit here, and I'll just put a little bit here, and it will add up, and it will be okay. Managers may be trying to suppress people doing things that isn't delivering, or what they think is delivering. And there may be other reasons why they're not forming. Next thing to do is get people together regularly, and it starts things forming. When I say regularly, what I say to new communities is that they should get together once a week. And the reason for once a week is that if it becomes twice a week, that's once every other week, if you miss one of those, then you don't see anyone for a month, and it starts to become a really long time. It makes it really difficult for anything to form. And this is a quote from somebody who was in an early community workshop when I got some people together. It was about knowing that they weren't alone. And actually what happens a lot of the time is there'll be someone over here doing a role and someone over here doing a role. And they didn't know that each other were doing that role. And they didn't ever have that chance to talk to each other. So getting people together is a great place to get people to start talking to each other. Creating a community charter. Who here has a team charter or a set of values and principles in their teams? Only a couple. If you don't, then you should. So this is your vision and things like the way you're going to behave towards each other and some of the values that you live to. So I did this recently with a client. I used a workshop called The Anti-Problem. So I got them to talk about what's the worst community. What would the worst community look like? And got them to talk about, they kind of came out with zombies, it's up there somewhere, came out with all the things that would make it terrible. So being judged, people not taking part, that kind of thing. And that actually led them to creating their own manifesto, which is the Agile Delivery Community Manifesto. So they created this as a group, and now this is something that they can kind of hang their hats on and always work towards and call each other out if it's not working very well. There is a link on here to the blog post that they wrote about this. Another thing that you can do and you should do is create a shared backlog of work. So those things, those shared problems that people have, things that they want to work on, creating a shared backlog, putting that in Trello and working on that at some of your meetings is a great way to build community. I'm going to do the hands up again. Who here does regular retrospectives? Not everyone, but quite a lot of people, which is great. So the same with a community. If you're in a community of practice, you want to make sure that it is meeting people's needs. So you want to be retrospecting regularly. That might be, it's not going to be every 2 weeks if you're only meeting every week, because that would be a bit intense. But on a regular basis, just checking in to see if it's still meeting people's needs or what it is that you need to do to change it and create the community that you want it to be. Okay, so a couple of other tips that I'm going to give you before I stop talking. They take time to work. So it actually takes quite a lot of effort to draw people together, particularly when they've got their projects and the thing that drops out, it's the same with retrospectives, the thing that drops out when you're really busy is the thing that could probably help you in the long run be less busy. So it's that learning that stops, that retrospecting that stops, and those communities of practice that stops. So it takes time and effort. This is a graph that I use in a maturity model that I have in my book and also free to download on my website, which I'll give you at the end. A community goes through a number of stages, and the energy. The really important thing, if any of you are doing this, and it's quite early on, just after forming, where people have started to get together and get excited about this thing, there's a dip in energy, and you suddenly go, it's not working. And that's just because the new shiny thing has stopped. And it goes through this dip, and that's really normal. But conversely, on this graph is the dotted line, which is the kind of input that it takes to make it happen. So this might be from an individual, it might be from a group of individuals, preferably a group rather than one person. So it takes a lot of time. And that means that people actually need to be given time. One ongoing debate I have at the moment with an organisation is about reducing utilisation rates, or at least creating a job code so that people can actually put their time on community activity and not just bury it in something else somewhere along the line. Communities must be empowered to make things happen. So this doesn't actually have to happen at the beginning. So you can just start getting together and making things happen, but at some point you're going to need some recognition from your organisation in order to change things. Now, I was speaking to somebody at Barclays Bank recently, and Barclays have communities of practice fairly established within their organisation. And one thing that they did when they started, actually their first community of practice was around NoSQL. And they had a bunch of people over there doing some investigation, a bunch of people over there, and they weren't joined up. So someone saw an opportunity to join up people that were doing the same thing and let them learn from each other. And it was a safe to fail environment because they didn't really tell senior management about it. They just kind of went about it. And it worked. It was great. They got some good results from it. And they did this again with another 2 communities. And they worked too. So then they went and pitched this to the CIO as a thing that needed some backing. And at that point, they managed to formalize them a little bit more, get some money put behind them, and also get each community had ended up with a senior sponsor, so somebody on the big table that would support them and fight their cause. Not everyone will want to join in, and that's okay. You can't make everybody do it. That's fine. You have different types of community members. You need core community. Actually, someone asked me once, how small can a community be? And I think the answer I said was 3 people. 3 people is a community, and that's fine. So you have core people, and those are the people that make it happen. You'll have active people, people that will come along regularly. Occasional, those people would dip in and out. And peripheral members tend to be your lurkers. And if any of you are part of any online communities, you'll know that you'll see those lurkers would just be there. Maybe you'll be one of them. And sometimes they dip in. And what tends to happen is, particularly with online communities, actually, is that people move in towards the middle when they're looking for more support. Maybe they need something extra, so they come in. You can exist without most of those layers. You can't exist without the core. But everything else is all right. And then just one other bit of advice. Don't become your own silo. So you've built this community, you've shut all the doors, you've created this safe space, and then you don't want to become your own silo as well. So what I often recommend is that early days that people do find a safe space and close the door and understand what membership looks like and keep the community to that membership. But then they do other things that open the door as well. So one thing I had whilst I was at GDS, I had lots of people saying, well, I want to learn more about Agile delivery. Can I come to your community? And I found myself saying, you can't come to these meetings because we need our safe space. But what we're going to do for you instead is offer you some open space where you can ask us whatever you want. in this space over here, and we'll do that learning, we'll do that sharing. But you can join up with other communities too. So finally, just a bit of a roundup. Communities of practice can help you scale, create a support network for members, can accelerate professional development, share knowledge and create better practice, increase collaboration and create value for the organisation. Do remember, it takes time and effort. Not everyone will want to take part, and that's okay. They will need at some point to be empowered in some way, and it needs that sense of community to make it work. Always put a picture of your book up. Consultant 101, that's it there. It's nice and small, so it's not intimidating, and you can read it quite quickly. It's actually iteration 1. I wrote it in an Agile way. It is iteration 1. Thank you. Don't forget to rate.
Okay, I've totally forgotten to look at the questions that have been submitted. So would anyone like to ask questions? We have some time left.
Hi, great talk. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the differences between building communities of practice inside an organization. Like you mentioned, letting that team come to some of the meetings about this or whatever, mm-hmm. And then talk about communities outside an organization, like meetups, et cetera. Like, what are some of the similarities or differences?
Okay, so I tend to talk about communities inside an organisation, but I also run meetups, which I don't think that I've got them to the point where they feel like a community, and some of that actually is about that sense of community stuff. I realised the other day that in the meetups I run, we don't actually let the members influence the direction of what we're doing. We kind of go, this is what we do, and we haven't actually asked you if that's all right yet, but you turn up, so that's okay. I would say that it's probably it's harder to build stuff that's outside of an organisation because there's kind of less imperative to go along, particularly if you have people around you that are doing something similar to you. I think if you're in an organisation where you are the only person within the organisation, then you tend to kind of reach out to those a bit more. So they're probably a little bit more. You've probably got a lot more occasional people in those than you have active members. It's probably mostly core and occasional, probably. Yes. I hope that helps.
Okay, I've managed to get access to the questions now. How do you define communities in an organisation where the roles are deliberately blurred? So there's no QA role or developer role.
Good question, and something that I'm dealing with at the moment. So I've stopped talking about job titles and started talking about roles, and within that particular organisation. And for those people that are core members, suggested that they find a way to describe those roles without using the job title. And then if people identify with those, so they're sharing the same challenges and doing the same things, that they are then part of that community of practice.
A quick one, hopefully. Are communities of practice the same as Spotify's guilds?
I said this to someone at Spotify and they went, no. So let me remember. So Spotify have chapters and guilds, and their chapters are a little bit more like communities of interest. So that is people that are interested in specific things, and they are more active. Their guilds, I think, are quite like communities of practice. They also have, I believe, line management that goes through the guilds, which is similar to the model that we had at GDS, in that line management was through communities of practice. So, yes, I think so.
Okay, two questions that are kind of two sides of the same coin. One, can you build a community without buy-in from management? And second, how do you get people to participate and fight for their right when they get pressured by deadline-focused managers?
So yes, you can build a community of practice without support from the organisation. It will become harder at some point because you won't necessarily be able to change those utilisation rates or get money or the things that are good. But if you do build one without support from management, you can then use the success of that to sell it in. And often showing something being successful is far better than talking about how it might be successful. What was the second question?
How do you get people to fight for their right when they get pressured by managers focusing on deadlines?
So that's where I think senior support comes in. And if you can find someone that believes that communities of practice are a good thing, get them on side and get them to support you, I would say.
Have you got any tips on creating communities of practice in distributed teams?
Like I'm doing at the moment. Yeah, so face-to-face is always best. We all know this. This is good. So one of the things at the moment, I'm trying to build communities, it's a bit of a challenge, trying to build communities of practice in teams that are distributed across the country. So at least in one country, not in many countries. Get some time where they can be face-to-face, if you can. If you can't get everyone in the same room, then if you can send one person from over here to over there one day and kind of mix it up a bit so people start to get to know each other. Video calls are good. Audio calls are terrible. If anyone's been on huge audio calls, you're just kind of not listening, you switch off, you don't know who's talking. But also other tools as well. So when you're not meeting, Slack is great. And one of the great things about Slack is it has that random channel. And the random channel is the bit where you have those conversations that aren't necessarily work-related and helps break down some of those barriers and helps build trust. So it's difficult, but it's much like distributed teams, it's possible.
And final question, does a community need a leader of some sort?
So I often talk about community leaders, and you can have leaders appointed. So it might be someone like when I was at GDS, I was a head of role. But actually one of the things that I wanted to do in that role is kind of step back and let the people from the community lead the community. So I'd say it's that core team that end up leading the community. Lots of different things that they might do, just things like making sure meetings happen and interesting things are happening, and that people are motivated to take part. So lots of different things there, but you have a group of leaders rather than a specific leader.
Okay, thanks very much.
Cool.